So your savings might be at risk, but not for the reasons you think. Everybody was recently distracted when Larry Fink was appointed the head of the World Economic Forum this week, but everybody completely missed what Scott Bessant just said in this recent interview.
We're not going to be buying that, but we are going to use confiscated assets.
So a lot of you guys have been a little bit alarmed with the recent videos that I've done on this channel. In one of them, I showed you the Bank of England's very own 4-step framework that they're going to be using to steal depositors' savings in the bank. And then in another video, we looked at Europe's plan to channel retail savings into EU priorities only days before they release their central bank digital currency. But many people watching these videos thought, Luke, I don't care. I'm from America. These rules will never come to America. Look, my government is buying Bitcoin. And a lot of people thought that, hang on a minute, even if these rules come, Bitcoin is an escape, right? Well, what Scott Bessant just said in this recent interview confirms that both of those statements are wrong.
We're not going to be buying that, but we are going to use confiscated assets and continue to build that up. We're going to stop selling that. I believe that Bitcoin reserve at today's prices is somewhere between 15 and 20 billion.
So the big idea I want to tackle today is, why is America talking about confiscating Bitcoin? Why is it talking about confiscating assets? Is there a deeper, darker plan at foot here? Why is Larry Fink, head of BlackRock, which is the world's largest asset manager, who is actually one of the largest Bitcoin holders, now being appointed at the head of the World Economic Forum? That is the same company who openly says that by 2030, you will own nothing and you will be happy. So is BlackRock's 750,000 Bitcoin going to be confiscated by the US government for a national strategic reserve? Or, curveball, what if it's MicroStrategy? Well, I know that sounds crazy, but we have an insider who recently said exactly this.
I just thought of something. I think I heard you on a show being asked about how the United States might acquire Bitcoin. And going out into the market, I mean, that would definitely move the price. So didn't you say something about the possibility that the government would actually instead try to, let's say, buy a company that has a lot of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that makes a lot of sense. I think the day the US says they want to acquire 1 million Bitcoin, I think Bitcoin's price is going to go up parabolically.
Right.
Because how is the US going to buy it? I mean, they can't, if you know their wallet, you're going to see every buy, and it's going to become a national pastime for everybody because they're a long buyer. I think it's going to be easier for them to buy large holders of Bitcoin. Maybe even give tax amnesty, right? That's why they're saying it's tax-free. We won't tax capital gains. They'll do everything they can to try to acquire Bitcoin. Maybe, but MicroStrategy has a sovereign put. They have 600,000 Bitcoin. That's the easiest way to get to 1 million Bitcoin.
Well, so how would that work, though? I mean, for people watching that think, like, property rights, hello, I mean, those are enshrined in our Constitution. Would a company have to sell to the government as long as they're willing to pay fair market? I mean, like, could they essentially nationalize a company? I mean, how does it work logistically?
Well, the U.S. has a history of acquiring and paying for strategically important things.
Mm-hmm. They just did so with the rare earths. I mean, the Pentagon deal with MP, I feel like it's not nationalizing it, but it's a strategic move.
Yeah, I think the U.S. government takes a private sector approach to that. So if MicroStrategy is at 400 and the clearing price to do that deal is 3,000 or something, it's probably cheaper to do that than to try to buy 1 million Bitcoin.
What do you think Michael Saylor's reaction to that would be?
So I know how crazy this might sound at first, but today I want to be talking about the black swan event of the US government seizing Coinbase's 3 million Bitcoin, BlackRock's 750,000 Bitcoin, and MicroStrategy's 600,000 Bitcoin. And I know how it sounds at first. Many of you guys are probably thinking, Luke, you're a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, but you are going to want to stay to the end of today's video because do not forget, America has already had a history of seizing people's assets. We can see Executive Order 6102 here. It made it very clear that in 1933, the US government seized the people's gold. And then the first really big red flag that I noticed about this clip here from Scott Bessant is the timing of his follow-up tweet. So this here is not a made-up Photoshop tweet. This is the official Twitter account of Scott Bessant. You can see he retweeted his interview on Fox News on August 14th. This is the interview that many people consider the biggest rug pull in American history. He said America is not looking to buy more Bitcoin. Actually, we've been selling Bitcoin, and the only way we buy more Bitcoin is through confiscated assets. That was, again, massive alarm bells to most people, thinking that America was going to be pro-Bitcoin, pro-freedom. A lot of people thought that Bitcoin would be the escape from all of the craziness happening in Europe right now and all of the talk that there is over there in the continent of Europe of confiscating your savings. But guess what? Bessant kind of pulled the rug, and I think he might have accidentally said a little bit too much in this interview, because look at this tweet literally hours after his interview on Fox News. He comes out and he says, oh, hang on a minute, wait on. Bitcoin that has been finally forfeited to the federal government will be the foundation of the strategic Bitcoin reserve. However, in addition, Treasury is committed to exploring budget-neutral pathways to acquire more Bitcoin to expand the reserve. So again, he just kind of said the quiet parts out loud in that tweet. He said, okay, what I said on the national news was a little bit too much information. Maybe we are going to explore budget-neutral ways to buy more Bitcoin. Let's not forget, Bo Hines, Donald Trump's right-hand man in charge of establishing the strategic Bitcoin reserve. He's been working closely with Trump for the past 6 months. Why did he recently leave after saying such bullish things like this?
You know, I feel like we're well on our way. I think we positioned ourselves to be, the Bitcoin superpower of the world, and we're going to deliver on the president's desires as it relates to that.
So again, I don't want to come off too much as a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist in today's video, but I simply think that Bo Hines was told by Scott Bessant, look, you are not going to be buying the Bitcoin that you want to buy for America's strategic Bitcoin reserve. Who knows why or what the deeper plot is here? But what I do find really interesting about Scott Bessant is his history. Let's have a look at this here, because let's not forget, a lot of people think that George Soros was the man who broke the British pound in 1992. But guess who was working for George Soros? Yours truly, Scott Bessant. This was known as one of the greatest trades in history and one of the biggest financial events in history. And like 6102, Executive Order 6102, it surprised absolutely everyone. Is there a coincidence there? I don't know, but what I do want to illustrate here is that please do not be surprised if Scott Bessant pulls off a wild card. He has had his hand in some very interesting trades, and maybe a confiscation of some of the Bitcoin held by the largest holders in America might be Scott Bessant's next economic wildcard. Now let's kind of break down step by step what concerns me the most with all of the honeypots and large points of centralization in Bitcoin. So the reason why I'm beginning to think that this conspiracy theory might be a little bit more plausible than most people think is by looking at how centralized Bitcoin holdings are in America. We can see Satoshi Nakamoto, the largest Bitcoin holder in the world, 1.1 million Bitcoin. But then look at the other biggest names on that list. Larry Fink now holds more than 3% of the entire Bitcoin supply, and MicroStrategy holds more than 3% of the total Bitcoin supply. Collectively, they hold 6.5% of the Bitcoin supply. And when you really break out the visualizations, and when you really take a little bit of a deeper look at just how much Bitcoin these entities hold, you can see how America is a little bit of a honeypot. Look at the Bitcoin held by Strategy here on this orange box. It's huge. It dwarfs the Bitcoin held by all of the other companies. And it is now beginning to get really interesting when you consider BlackRock holds 3% of the total Bitcoin supply. MicroStrategy, another 3% of the supply. And then I think the big wild card here is Coinbase. Let's not forget, Coinbase collectively holds around 3 million Bitcoin. This is between Coinbase custody and the Bitcoin on the exchanges at Coinbase. And again, what I find really interesting is how many times Brian Armstrong has visited the White House since Trump got into office. Have a look at this for a headline. Coinbase CEO plans to hire 1,000 workers, saying that Trump breathed life back into the industry. Don't you think that's strange? And again, have a look at where this photo is from. Who's in the background? World Economic Forum. Before we get to Larry Fink's new job role, again, Brian has been everywhere related to the White House recently. I'm just speculating here, but I do think it's interesting that Coinbase custodies the Bitcoin for 8 out of the 9 largest Bitcoin ETFs. So collectively, if you start looking at the broader picture here, we've got Coinbase, we've got BlackRock, we've got Michael Saylor. 3 entities who have interesting connections. Let's not forget MicroStrategy's head office is literally a block away from the FBI. Then we've got Brian Armstrong, a man who refused to say the word Bitcoin on his Twitter account for more than 6 years and deliberately ignored the asks of thousands of Bitcoiners to actually implement the Lightning Network at his exchange, Coinbase. And again, the man who's spoken at the World Economic Forum more times than I've got fingers on my hands. Brian's got some interesting backgrounds, so let's just say that. And then, of course, we've got Larry Fink. Larry Fink, the man who recently came out and shocked the world by being pro-Bitcoin, saying that Bitcoin is digitizing gold and it's an international asset. He nearly even said Bitcoin is hope. But let's not forget the origins of Larry Fink, because only a couple of years ago, he directly said the quiet parts out loud of what BlackRock does.
You now make a point of that's an investment criteria for you.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. 54% of the incoming class are women. We added 4 more points in terms of diverse employment this year, and what we're doing internally is if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted. Okay,
we're doing the same thing.
And so it's just you have to force behaviors, and if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted, and that's not recruiting, it is development, as Ken said. And ultimately, it's still going to take time, but I am just as much shocked as Ken is that we have not seen more opportunities, and we're going to have to force change.
So that's the head of the World Economic Forum openly saying that we can force behavior change. Now, that's a little bit of a shocking interview that most people forget. And people also forget some of the interesting language and caveats buried in BlackRock's original Bitcoin ETF filing. Again, I want to dive into that in a minute, but before we get there and before we start talking about doomsday scenarios and problems, I just want to remind you there are solutions here. We're not just talking about problems. The biggest solution and the biggest way that you can protect yourself from any attack or 6102 event in the Bitcoin space is by buying one of these. It's called buying a Bitcoin hardware wallet and taking custody of your Bitcoin yourself. Again, you don't need to trust Larry Fink. You don't need to trust Brian Armstrong. You don't need to trust an exchange with your Bitcoin. You can literally take custody. And again, I love Bitcoin hardware wallets. I think there's a ton of great hardware wallets. This was my first one I ever picked up. This is a Ledger. And again, today's a special day because we're not only talking about problems, but Ledger is running a massive promotion where they're literally giving you $80 of free Bitcoin if you buy a hardware wallet. I know it's crazy. I know it might sound a little bit too good to be true to get one of these for $70 off, but you can see Ledger's running a massive promotion, meaning if you've been dragging your heels and if you've been putting off buying a Bitcoin hardware wallet, today is the last day for you to take advantage of this massive promotion. Look at this. You can actually buy a hardware wallet for $79, and it's going to come with $30 of free Bitcoin as a voucher in the wallet. Again, highly recommend you check out the link down below in the description and take self-custody of your Bitcoin, because it is the only way for you to actually defend yourself against these attacks that will continue to come. And again, once you hold in your own keys and once you've taken control of your Bitcoin 12 or 24 words, make sure you punch that into titanium. Please don't write those on paper. Paper will fail. Paper will break, paper will rip, paper will not survive a fire or a flood or a hurricane. So check out Stampseed and get yourself 15% off anything you want to buy from Stampseed with that promo code Luke15, because if Larry Fink has his way, he might even try to come after your Bitcoin 12 or 24 words in another way. Now that, of course, is looking at how Larry Fink said some really interesting things in the original Bitcoin ETF filing back in 2023. You can see this is on page 24 of BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF filing. You can see BlackRock said there is no guarantee that the sponsor will choose the digital asset that is ultimately the most valuable fork in the event of a hard fork. Now, again, this should really make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up a little bit here, because BlackRock not only has said this out loud, we know that they have massive stakes in some of the largest Bitcoin companies like MicroStrategy. They hold a massive 6% stake over there. We can see they also hold a massive stake over some of the biggest Bitcoin mining companies as well. And I think this is really interesting. And I think this is really now starting to become a very big concern here. Okay, again, Coinbase, 2.2 million coins. We can see Coinbase custody. They hold a ton of Bitcoin, and I am right now beginning to be alarmed that we might be setting up for a very interesting next 2, 3, 4 years in Bitcoin. Again, I don't think there's any coincidence that Larry Fink is now head of the World Economic Forum. And this announcement literally came hours after Scott Bessant, I think, accidentally slipped up and said those really strange comments about confiscating assets for America's strategic Bitcoin reserve. All I'm going to say is pay very close attention to what these people are saying. Protect yourself while you still can. Again, take advantage of that massive offer while it lasts. You got a couple of hours left to get yourself practically a free hardware wallet. Again, if you've been looking to set up a multi-signature wallet, you may as well go and buy 3 hardware wallets now, and you're pretty much paying the price of 2. So again, protect yourself, because I don't think that this idea is so far-fetched. I think there's actually a much higher chance that we do see another 6102 in America. And I think it might come sooner than you think when you start considering just how few Bitcoin there is left on the exchanges today. Look, guys, I think it's pretty clear. Larry Fink, from day one, before he even launched his Bitcoin ETF, showed that he shouldn't be trusted with that strange language about Bitcoin hard forks. Then in another clip that BlackRock specifically made for Bitcoin, let's not forget the little caveat, the little fine print that was buried at the very bottom of their video. Of course, these words were never spoken out loud, but BlackRock added the caveat. There is no guarantee that Bitcoin's 21 million hard cap supply stays that way. Look, I don't know about you guys, but I think there's a lot of red flags here, and I highly encourage you to pay very close attention to this space. Again, the timing of this potential maybe attack, I think it's probably going to come quicker than you think. I think it's probably going to be executed before the number of Bitcoin on exchanges hits 0. Today, based on the past 5 years of data and 5 years worth of this trend of Bitcoin leaving the exchanges, it looks like we might have about 2 to 3 years left until we see 0 Bitcoin on the exchanges. We've seen about 500,000 Bitcoin leave the OTC desks. These desks have been drained by 80% in the past 3 years. And the number of Bitcoin on exchanges, we've got about 2.2 million Bitcoin left on exchanges today. And this has been decreased by about 30 to 35% since 2020. So who knows, maybe you've got a couple of years left to take self-custody of your Bitcoin while you still can. Again, all I'm going to say is I'm just thankful that we have the ability to take self-custody of our Bitcoin. Again, check out that massive promotion and discount down below on Ledger and take self-custody while you still can. And if you do want to learn a little bit more about these recent attacks on savings coming out of the UK and Europe. I'm going to put 2 links to some recent videos that I filmed up on screen somewhere around there. And with all that said, let me know what you thought of this one down below in the comments. I'll see you all in the next one.